For those of you who don't know me, I'm currently a college student, and I'm going for game design. I'm in my 3rd year, and as one of my finals, I had to make a game. So here's how I made my game Panic Button in only 9 hours. So to start off, let me tell you exactly what we had to do for the assignment. Our assignment was just to make a game that had levels. The easiest thing I could think of was a platformer for this, because platformers typically have different levels. But I wanted to make a short arcade style game too. So as I got to thinking, I remembered an old project of mine. I made this platformer controller that I thought felt really good to use, but I just hadn't used it for a game yet. So I decided to go off of this base and add to it. I started by moving this controller over to a new project. And from there, I thought about what could the goal of the game be? Well, I have really good movement, so let's base it around that. For this game, you're just gonna have to dodge projectiles. It's gonna be a sort of bullet hell platformer mix. So I started setting up the bullets where I could put my own patterns in. I had 4 different spawn points on each side of the screen. From there, through code, I was able to pick exactly which ones would spawn which bullets. I also made different patterns for shooting the bullets, such as a single bullet, 3 bullets quickly, 2 accelerating bullets, along with others. Now this was already a pretty good base. It was pretty fun to dodge these projectiles, but I thought, what else could I add? Well, I could shoot bullets from above. So I added 7 more spawn points above, and I found that this was already too hard for players. I wanted the difficulty to scale over time. So I added a variable called difficulty, where every 10 seconds it would go up by 1. I could then use this variable to scale up the difficulty in the back end. There's a couple ways I did this. The first one was just the simplest way to scale up the difficulty. Make the bullets faster. The bullets get their base speed, and then add on top of it, multiplying by this difficulty scale. The next thing I added to scale the difficulty was how quickly the bullets spawn. To start out, a new pattern will be shot at the player every 6 to 7 seconds on random. I just subtracted 0.2 seconds from this timer based on how high the difficulty was. This means bullets will start spawning quicker and quicker as the player gets further and further. And then going back to bullets shooting from above, I also had those start shooting at a certain difficulty. So when the player starts out, it will only shoot from the sides, and then after 40 seconds, it'll start shooting from above as well. This gave a nice ramping difficulty curve. The last thing I had with this difficulty scaler was new patterns start spawning. So to start out, the player will only encounter regular bullets. After the difficulty gets to a certain threshold, it'll start opening up new patterns with new bullet types. The first bullet type was this accelerating bullet. The next one was a bomb. It'll travel slowly and then explode. Now that I had all these systems in place, I started adding polish. Whoa, before we continue with the video, why don't you check out my Discord? I made this Discord with a friend of mine who's a streamer over on Twitch, and both of us like to just hang out and talk with people there. So if you ever want to talk to me or have a suggestion for a game or a video, go to the link in the description to join that Discord. Hope I see you over there. Now let's get back to the video. I needed a way for the player to know where bullets are going to be shot out from. So I added this little exclamation mark, and then I hooked it up so it's going to spawn on the side of the screen wherever the bullet's going to come from. I also made this little pop animation just to give it a little bit of juice. This really made the game feel way nicer to play. I went further on top of this and added a little bit of squash and stretch for when the player jumps and lands. I also added a little bit of movement to the bullets themselves. Overall, this just made the scene feel a lot nicer. Now the game at this point was already pretty fun, and getting a high score was as simple as lasting as long as possible. But if you remember from before, I wanted to make it an arcade style game, so I wanted there to be high scores. That's where the panic button comes in. While you're in the arena, you're gonna have to collect these blue blobs, and they're gonna be moving around as you collect them. When you collect one, you get some score, and this score increases the longer you last in the arena. Along with this, it'll also slowly fill up the panic meter at the bottom. Once this meter is full, the player at any time can press spacebar to clear bullets around them and get points for each one cleared. Another way for this panic button to go off is if the player's hit. It'll just count as a second life for the player. So there's a bit of risk and reward. If there's a lot of bullets on screen, the player can activate it early to get a lot of points, but then it gets rid of the safety net that they built up. This gave a pretty clear goal for the player. Go around and collect these blobs. It also added 2 different ways to get a high score. How long can you last, and what's the highest score you can get. And I already added polish to everything else in the game, so I wanted to polish up the blobs. I added a little bit of movement to those, and then a lot of particles for when you collect it and when it moves around. Now I got into the last part of this game, the sound effects. I really didn't feel like making sounds for this game, so I just did a little copy pasting from my old games, and it sounded great. I have a little chime when you collect the blob, which feels great. I have a couple notes to play when you fill up the panic bar, and I have these really nice blob sound effects for when it's filling as well. I really like how it sounds when the player jumps and lands. Now up to this point, I spent 8 hours making this game. I then sent it to a couple friends for them to playtest, and they gave me some feedback. I made a few changes based on this feedback then. The first thing I did is add a screen flash for whenever the player's hit. This just gives a little extra feedback so you know that you got hit. I also modified some of the values for jumping, because when you're in the circle form, it was a little hard to get up on a platform, so I just made it jump a little higher. When the player collects his blob, it'll also change their state to whatever the blob is, such as a square or a circle. These 2 different states have different movement speeds and different jump heights. This made the game a little bit more dynamic, as the player's movement is constantly changing up. Off of this feedback, I spent around another hour, making the total time to make this game around 9 hours. Now this is 9 hours, but I still borrowed a little bit of assets from my old games. I looked at this assignment almost similar to a game jam, wanting to do it in a limited amount of time. This allowed me to really polish the game up and not have to focus on graphics as much. Go to the link in the description to try the game out yourself. These are the scores that I got for each arena, so let me know in the comments if you got a higher score than me or lasted longer than me. I hope you liked the video, and be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. See you next time.